There's something haunting about a city that once thrived, bustling with life, trade, and ideas, only to vanish without warning, leaving behind whispers of what was. Picture Ugarit, a glittering jewel of the Bronze Age, where merchants haggled over goods from distant lands, scribes penned some of the earliest alphabets, and diplomats brokered deals that shaped empires. This was a place at the crossroads of the world, a melting pot of cultures and innovations, and then, in what feels like the blink of an eye, it was gone. But here's the thing, Ugarit's story didn't end with its collapse. Instead, its fall became a ripple that still touches us today, a silent lesson etched into the bones of history. What if I told you that the demise of this ancient city holds uncanny parallels to the challenges we face now: global instability, economic fragility, even the way we communicate? Ugarit's downfall wasn't just a local tragedy, it was a warning, a blueprint of how interconnected societies can unravel. Think about it, a single event, whether an invasion, a natural disaster, or a trade collapse, can send shockwaves through a system that seemed unshakable. Sound familiar? The threads connecting Ugarit's fate to our modern world are stronger than you might realize, and uncovering them reveals just how fragile and resilient human civilization truly is. So why does this 3,000-year-old city matter today? Because history isn't just a record of the past, it's a mirror. The people of Ugarit lived, loved, and struggled just as we do, and their choices and their crises offer us a chance to see our own world with fresh eyes. In this video, we'll piece together the clues left behind, the charred ruins, the cryptic tablets, the echoes of a society that once stood at the pinnacle of its age. Together, we'll explore how Ugarit's fall reshaped the ancient world and how its legacy lingers in ways you'd never expect. This isn't just a story about the past, it's a lens to understand our present and perhaps our future. So let's step into the shadows of history and discover why Ugarit's silence still speaks to us. To understand how Ugarit fell, we first need to grasp just how dazzling its rise truly was. Imagine a city humming with activity, where ships from Egypt, Cyprus, and beyond crowded its harbors, unloading copper, ivory, and precious purple dye. Streets buzzed with merchants haggling in half a dozen languages, while scribes in the palace archives etched contracts and myths onto clay tablets using a revolutionary new system, an alphabet so simple it would one day shape the way we all write. This wasn't just a wealthy city, it was a cultural powerhouse, a place where Hittite diplomats rubbed shoulders with Mycenaean traders, and where artisans blended styles from across the ancient world into something uniquely Ugaritic. But what made Ugarit extraordinary also made it vulnerable. Its prosperity depended on a delicate web trade routes that stretched thousands of miles, alliances with powerful neighbors, and a stable climate that kept harvests abundant. For centuries, this system thrived, but beneath the surface, tensions simmered. The very connections that fueled Ugarit's golden age would soon become its undoing. When drought strained food supplies, when rival kingdoms clashed, when mysterious invaders began raiding coastlines, Ugarit's fortunes started to unravel. The city's leaders sent desperate letters to allies, pleading for help as threats closed in from all sides. What's chilling is how modern this all feels. Ugarit's story reminds us that no society, no matter how advanced, is immune to collapse when the threads holding it together begin to fray. The city didn't fall because it was weak, it fell because it was interconnected, because its success relied on a world that was itself teetering on the edge. Sound familiar? In an age of global supply chains and digital networks, Ugarit's fate is less a distant tragedy and more a cautionary tale about the fragility of even the mightiest civilizations. Ugarit wasn't alone in its downfall. The city's tragic end was just one piece of a far larger puzzle, the Bronze Age collapse, a catastrophe so vast it rewrote the map of the ancient world. Picture this: across the Mediterranean, from Greece to Egypt, mighty kingdoms that had stood for centuries crumbled within decades. Palaces burned, trade routes went silent, and entire languages disappeared. It wasn't just a war or a single disaster. It was a perfect storm of crises piling up until the system buckled. Droughts strained harvests, earthquakes shattered cities, and waves of mysterious raiders, known only as the Sea Peoples, swept through coastlines like a force of nature. But here's what's truly striking: these civilizations didn't fail in isolation. Their fates were tangled together, bound by the very trade and diplomacy that had once made them strong. Take the Hittites, a superpower of the age. When their grain stores ran low, they turned to Ugarit for help, pleading for shipments to stave off famine. But Ugarit, already stretched thin, couldn't save them or itself. Meanwhile, in Egypt, pharaohs scrambled to repel the Sea Peoples, leaving allies like Ugarit vulnerable. This wasn't just bad luck, it was a chain reaction. The Bronze Age world had grown so interconnected that when one link broke, the whole network collapsed. Sound familiar? Today, we call this systemic risk, the idea that a shock in one part of the globe can send ripples everywhere, from stock markets to supermarket shelves. And then there's the climate. Tree rings and ancient pollen tell a grim story. Prolonged droughts turned fertile lands to dust, forcing migrations and fueling conflicts. Societies that had thrived for generations suddenly found themselves fighting over shrinking resources. It's a scenario that feels uncomfortably modern, as rising temperatures and extreme weather events test the resilience of our own world. But here's the twist: the Bronze Age collapse wasn't just a story of destruction. It was also a reset, a crucible that forged new ways of living. Out of the ashes, simpler, more adaptable societies emerged. The alphabet pioneered in Ugarit. It survived, evolving into the scripts we use today. The lesson here isn't just about fragility, it's about transformation. When the old order fell, it cleared space for innovation. So when we look at Ugarit's collapse, we're not just studying ancient history. We're holding up a mirror to our own interconnected, climate-stressed world. The past whispers a warning: prosperity is never guaranteed, but neither is decline the end of the story. The real question isn't whether our civilization could falter, it's what we might build from the pieces. The cracks in Ugarit's foundations began forming long before the first invaders appeared on the horizon, not from enemy swords, but from the sky itself. Scientists studying ancient tree rings and clay tablets have uncovered a chilling truth. The city's golden age coincided with a period of reliable rains, but as the climate shifted, decades of drought parched the land. Crops withered, grain stores emptied, and the once bustling markets grew quiet as hunger gnawed at the social fabric. This wasn't just a bad harvest or two, it was a slow, unrelenting squeeze that left Ugarit's leaders scrambling to feed their people while maintaining alliances with equally desperate neighbors. Consider a letter sent from Ugarit's king to the ruler of Cyprus, pleading for emergency shipments of grain. "There is famine in our house," he wrote, a stark admission from a civilization built on abundance. But Cyprus, facing its own shortages, couldn't help. This domino effect of scarcity reveals a brutal truth. Environmental stress doesn't just weaken a society, it frays the very networks that hold civilizations together. When trust between allies erodes, when populations grow restless, the stage is set for collapse. Now fast forward 3,000 years. Satellite images show modern farmlands drying up, reservoirs shrinking, and climate refugees on the move. The parallels are impossible to ignore. Just as Ugarit scribes recorded dwindling harvests, today's scientists track rising temperatures and erratic weather patterns with uncanny similarity. But here's where history offers a glimmer of hope. Ugarit's people didn't passively accept their fate. Archaeologists have found evidence of irrigation projects and grain storage innovations, a testament to human ingenuity in the face of crisis. Yet resilience has its limits. When the droughts dragged on, when the Hittite Empire, Ugarit's powerful ally, collapsed under similar pressures, the city's fate was sealed. Climate change didn't destroy Ugarit alone, but it lit the fuse, proving that even the mightiest civilizations are tethered to the land and skies that sustain them. The lesson: environmental crises don't just reshape landscapes, they rewrite history. And as we confront our own changing climate, Ugarit's story reminds us that adaptation isn't just about survival. It's about preserving the connections that make civilization possible. Even now, 3,000 years later, the Sea Peoples remain one of history's most haunting mysteries. Picture a force so formidable that ancient scribes described them as a storm from the sea, a wave of destruction that left burned cities and shattered empires in its wake. These weren't ordinary raiders, they moved with terrifying coordination, striking Ugarit and other coastal powers at their weakest moment, when drought and famine had already stretched resources thin. But who were they? The truth is, we still don't know for certain. Egyptian carvings depict them as fierce warriors with horned helmets and strange, flaring ships, while clay tablets from Ugarit beg for reinforcements against an enemy that seemed to come from nowhere. Some scholars believe they were displaced refugees, fleeing their own collapsing homelands. Others argue they were professional mercenaries, hired by one kingdom only to turn on them all. What's undeniable is their role as the spark that ignited the tinderbox of the Bronze Age. What makes the Sea Peoples so chilling isn't just their violence, it's how they exploited vulnerabilities others couldn't see. Ugarit's navy, once the pride of the Mediterranean, had been sent to aid the Hittites, leaving the city defenseless. Trade networks that normally shared warnings had fallen silent. By the time the alarm was raised, it was too late. The Sea Peoples didn't just attack, they took advantage of a system already teetering on collapse. In that way, they were less like barbarian hordes and more like a virus, finding cracks in the immune system of civilization. And here's where the parallels grip us. Today, we face our own invisible marauders, cyber attacks that cripple pipelines, disinformation campaigns that destabilize nations, pandemics that leap across borders. Like the Sea Peoples, these threats thrive on interconnection, turning our greatest strengths into liabilities. The lesson isn't that we should fear outsiders, but that resilience requires more than walls and warships. Ugarit's rulers never imagined their trusted trade partners might vanish, or that their allies would be too overwhelmed to help. Yet the Sea People's story isn't just one of destruction. In their wake, new powers rose, smaller, nimbler societies that learned from the chaos. The Phoenicians, inheritors of Ugarit's maritime legacy, would go on to pioneer trade routes across the known world. The alphabet born in Ugarit's ashes became the foundation of modern writing. Crisis, it seems, doesn't just erase, it forces reinvention. So when we study these ancient raiders, we're not just uncovering a historical whodunit. We're asking ourselves, in a world of looming threats, how do we become the ones who adapt rather than the ones who disappear? Ugarit's wealth wasn't built on gold or conquest, it was built on trade. Imagine a city where fortunes were made not in mines or battlefields, but in the bustling docks where goods from Egypt, Anatolia, and Mesopotamia changed hands. Copper from Cyprus, ivory from Africa, cedar wood from Lebanon, these weren't just commodities. They were the lifeblood of Ugarit's economy. The city's scribes kept meticulous records of every shipment, every deal, etching contracts into clay tablets with the precision of modern accountants. But this reliance on far-flung trade routes was a double-edged sword. Ugarit thrived when the networks hummed, but when those connections snapped, the entire system shuddered. The cracks began with something as simple as a delayed shipment. A drought in Anatolia meant fewer grain caravans reaching Hittite cities, which relied on Ugarit's ports to redistribute food. Then came pirate raids on merchant ships, making voyages riskier and more expensive. Suddenly, the copper traders from Cyprus couldn't guarantee safe passage, and the price of bronze essential for tools and weapons skyrocketed. Ugarit's leaders watched helplessly as their economy, once a well-oiled machine, began to sputter. Sound familiar? Modern supply chain disruptions, whether from a stranded cargo ship in the Suez Canal or a pandemic halting factory production, show how quickly global trade can unravel. But here's what's even more striking. Ugarit's financial system was eerily sophisticated, with loans, credit, and even something resembling futures contracts. Merchants relied on promises written in clay, trusting that distant partners would honor their debts. When the Bronze Age collapse hit, that trust evaporated. A tablet from Ugarit's ruins captures the panic, a merchant's desperate plea for repayment as his creditors vanished into chaos. It's a scene that could play out today. Think of the ripple effects when a major bank fails or a currency crashes. The lesson isn't that trade is bad. It's that interdependence without resilience is a recipe for disaster. Yet Ugarit's story isn't just a warning, it's a challenge. The city's traders were pioneers, navigating risks we still grapple with. They diversified their routes, stockpiled emergency reserves, and forged alliances to share the burden of crises. Their mistake wasn't being globalized, it was assuming the good times would never end. Today, as we face our own economic uncertainties, from climate-driven crop failures to digital currencies upending traditional finance, we have the chance to learn from their hindsight. The question isn't whether our global economy is fragile. It's whether we'll build the shock absorbers Ugarit never had. Buried in the ruins of Ugarit's royal archives, archaeologists uncovered something that would change our understanding of human communication. Small clay tablets inscribed with wedge-shaped marks that didn't resemble the complex cuneiform or hieroglyphs of neighboring empires. Instead, they found something startlingly simple, 30 individual symbols, each representing a distinct sound. This was the Ugaritic alphabet, a revolutionary leap in writing that stripped language down to its bare essentials. Imagine the power of that breakthrough, no longer needing hundreds of symbols to express ideas, just a handful of letters that could be combined endlessly. It was like swapping a heavy toolbox for a sleek multi-tool, and its efficiency would echo through millennia. What made Ugarit's alphabet so groundbreaking wasn't just its simplicity, but its adaptability. Unlike Egypt's hieroglyphs or Mesopotamia's cuneiform, which required years of training to master, this system could be learned in weeks. Suddenly, writing wasn't just for elite scribes. It was within reach of merchants, soldiers, even farmers. Tablets from Ugarit reveal everything from epic poetry to grocery lists, proving that literacy had begun to democratize. And here's the twist: while Ugarit itself fell, its writing system didn't. The Phoenicians, inheritors of this tradition, refined it further, spreading it across the Mediterranean. From there, it evolved into Greek, Latin, and eventually the very letters you're reading now. But Ugarit's scribes did more than just invent symbols. They cracked the code of how we think. By breaking language into sounds, they unlocked the ability to record not just facts, but the rhythm of human speech. A love poem composed in Ugaritic 3,000 years ago still pulses with emotion, while a merchant's complaint about late shipments feels eerily modern. This wasn't just writing, it was the birth of a new way to preserve the human experience. Yet the real marvel lies in how ordinary this revolution seems today. We take for granted that 26 letters can express everything from scientific theories to birthday cards. But in Ugarit's time, that was magic. The next time you jot down a note or text a friend, remember, you're tapping into an innovation forged in the fires of a crumbling Bronze Age city, proof that even in collapse, ideas can become immortal. Among the ashes of Ugarit's palace, archaeologists found treasures more valuable than gold, hundreds of clay tablets preserving the whispered conversations of kings. These weren't just letters, they were masterclasses in statecraft, revealing how a small city navigated a world of towering empires. Picture a scribe hunched over wet clay, carefully etching a message from Ugarit's king to the pharaoh of Egypt. To the sun, my father, 7 times and 7 times I bow. This wasn't mere flattery, it was strategic genius, acknowledging Egypt's power while securing Ugarit's place in its orbit. Every word was calibrated, every gesture loaded with meaning. What's astonishing is how familiar these ancient negotiations feel. A tablet from the Hittite emperor warns Ugarit's king against trading with his rivals, threatening to turn his land to salt if disobeyed, an early example of economic sanctions. Another shows Ugarit playing mediator between feuding neighbors, offering harbor access to smooth tensions. These rulers understood what modern diplomats know. Power isn't just about armies, it's about leverage, timing, and the art of making threats without drawing swords. But the real brilliance lies in what these letters don't say. Between the lines, you can trace entire strategies, like when Ugarit's king carefully avoided mentioning a failed harvest to maintain the illusion of strength. Or the way he'd delay responses to urgent requests, buying time to assess shifting alliances. This was psychological warfare waged with stylus and clay, where silence spoke as loudly as words. Yet Ugarit's diplomatic web had a fatal flaw: over-reliance on a few powerful patrons. When the Hittite Empire collapsed, the city's carefully cultivated alliances evaporated overnight. Its last known letter, a frantic plea for help against invaders, was never answered. The lesson: even the slickest diplomacy crumbles without backup plans. Today, as nations navigate shifting power blocks and trade wars, Ugarit's archives remind us that no alliance lasts forever. The smartest players, then and now, are those who build flexibility into every handshake deal. Walk through the streets of Ugarit at its height, and you'd hear a symphony of languages: Hittite merchants haggling in the market, Mycenaean sailors swapping stories by the docks, Egyptian scribes dictating letters to local interpreters. This wasn't just a trading hub, it was a cultural laboratory where ideas from across the ancient world collided and merged. Artisans crafted statues blending Egyptian gods with Anatolian symbols, while scribes adapted Mesopotamian cuneiform into something entirely new. Even the city's cuisine told a story of exchange. Spices from the Levant, olive oil from Crete, and grains from the Nile Valley all shared space in Ugarit's kitchens. What made this diversity remarkable wasn't just its existence, it was how Ugarit's people wielded it as a strength. Take the famous ball cycle, an epic poem discovered in the city's ruins. While honoring the Canaanite storm god Baal, it wove in themes from Babylonian mythology and stylistic flourishes borrowed from Homeric traditions. This wasn't careless borrowing, it was deliberate synthesis, creating art that resonated across cultures. Similarly, Ugarit's architects designed temples with Egyptian columns and Mesopotamian floor plans, while musicians fused lyres from Cyprus with rhythms from Syria. In a world where many kingdoms defined themselves by purity, Ugarit thrived by embracing hybridity. Yet this cultural fluidity came with tensions. Tablets reveal debates between traditionalists fearing dilution and modernists pushing for openness, a Bronze Age culture war echoing today's struggles over globalization. When a Hittite governor complained that Ugaritic youths were dressing like Egyptians and singing like Babylonians, it exposed the same anxieties about identity we still grapple with. But Ugarit's elites made a calculated choice. They bet that cultural agility would make them indispensable. By serving as translators, not just of language but of art, law, and religion, they positioned their city as the glue holding empires together. The lesson here isn't just that diversity is virtuous, it's that it's strategic. Ugarit's golden age coincided precisely with its peak as a crossroads, while its decline began when trade routes contracted and walls went up. Today, as nationalism resurges worldwide, Ugarit whispers a counterintuitive truth. The societies best positioned to endure aren't those that fear outside influence, but those that master the alchemy of turning difference into innovation. Its ruins remind us that culture isn't a fortress to defend, it's a living thing, forever reshaped by the currents it encounters. Beneath the ruins of Ugarit's temples, archaeologists uncovered clay tablets that would rewrite our understanding of ancient faith, myths so strikingly familiar they echo across millennia. One tells of a god who battles the sea, another of a divine feast where bread and wine become sacred. These aren't just stories, they're blueprints for beliefs that would shape Judaism, Christianity, and Islam centuries later. Parallels are uncanny. Ugarit's storm god Baal, who rides the clouds and defeats chaos, mirrors language later used to describe Yahweh in the Psalms. Their ritual texts speak of sacrifices without blemish, a phrase that appears word for word in the Hebrew Bible. Even the concept of a cosmic enemy tempting humanity, think the serpent in Eden, finds its roots in Ugaritic tales of rebellion among the gods. But here's what's truly remarkable. Ugarit's religious influence wasn't about direct copying. It was a slow alchemy of ideas where motifs blended and mutated as they traveled. Take the story of Daniel, a righteous king in Ugaritic myth who pleads for a son, a narrative that scholars believe influenced the biblical figure of Daniel. Or the sacred marriage ritual between Baal and the goddess Anat, which may have inspired later metaphors of divine covenant. These weren't accidents, they were the result of a cultural crossroads where traders, refugees, and diplomats exchanged beliefs as freely as spices and silver. Yet Ugarit's spiritual legacy goes beyond borrowed plots. Its rituals reveal a worldview where the divine was deeply personal. Tablets describe families gathering to honor ancestors with meals, a practice that resonates in modern traditions like Mexico's Dia de los Muertos or China's Qingming Festival. Their hymns blur the line between poetry and prayer, much like the Psalms' raw emotional appeals. Even their concept of the afterlife, a shadowy realm where souls drink from dusty cups, hints at universal human anxieties about mortality that transcend time. The real question isn't just where these connections lead, but why they matter today. Ugarit reminds us that faith has always been a conversation, not a monologue. Its myths didn't vanish, they transformed, proving that the most enduring beliefs are those flexible enough to evolve. When we trace these threads, from Bronze Age temples to modern worship, we're not just studying history. We're seeing how humanity's oldest questions find new answers in every age. Digging into the soil of Ugarit isn't just about uncovering ruins. It's like piecing together a shattered mirror, each fragment reflecting a sliver of a lost world. When French archaeologists first broke ground at the site in the 1920s, they expected to find another Bronze Age outpost. Instead, they stumbled upon a time capsule. The royal palace alone yielded over 2,000 clay tablets, many still nestled in their original shelves, as if waiting for scribes to return. These weren't dry bureaucratic records. They were snapshots of life, marriage contracts etched beside prayers, trade receipts mixed with epic poetry. One tablet even preserves a frantic note from a baker complaining about flour shortages, proving that some worries never change. But the real magic lies in how these discoveries rewrite history in real time. Take the temples of Ugarit, where altars still bear stains from sacrifices made 3,000 years ago. Beneath one shrine, excavators found a cache of ivory carvings so delicate they seemed to breathe gods with almond-shaped eyes, lions mid-roar, all influenced by styles from Egypt to Mesopotamia. This wasn't just art, it was a testament to a city that absorbed the world's cultures and remade them into something new. Even the architecture tells a story. Thick walls designed to withstand earthquakes, drainage systems rivaling Rome's, and courtyards positioned to catch Mediterranean breezes. Ugarit's builders thought centuries ahead, yet their ingenuity couldn't save them from the avalanche of collapse. Then there are the puzzles that still taunt us. In a hidden chamber beneath the palace, archaeologists uncovered a trove of bronze weapons not stored for war, but carefully arranged in a ritual pattern. Nearby, a single child's footprint, preserved in dried plaster, hints at a ceremony lost to time. These silent witnesses raise more questions than answers. Was this a desperate plea to the gods as invaders closed in? A final act of defiance, every layer peeled back reveals another mystery, like the strange absence of human remains. Unlike Pompeii, Ugarit's left no frozen moments of tragedy, just empty streets and unread letters, as if its people vanished into thin air. Yet perhaps the most haunting discovery isn't a thing but a void. The city's final tablet, still in its clay envelope, was never opened. Its message remains sealed forever, a whisper from the brink of oblivion. That's the power of archaeology. It doesn't just show us how Ugarit lived, it forces us to confront how civilizations end, not with a bang, but with unanswered questions. And as teams still sift through the site with ground-penetrating radar and 3D imaging, who knows what other secrets lie buried? Maybe the next scrape of a trowel will reveal the missing piece that makes sense of it all, or better yet, a clue that upends everything we thought we knew. The silence after Ugarit's fall was deafening. Where once ships clogged the harbor and scribes filled tablets with bustling trade records, now there were only weeds pushing through cracked streets and the occasional scavenger picking through rubble. This wasn't just the end of a city. It was the unraveling of an entire world order. For nearly 3 centuries after Ugarit's destruction, the Eastern Mediterranean slipped into what scholars call a dark age, a twilight period where literacy dwindled, grand palaces lay in ruins, and the intricate trade networks that had sustained Bronze Age civilizations frayed into nothingness. Imagine entire languages forgotten, technologies like fresco making lost, and populations shrinking so drastically that some regions wouldn't recover their numbers for 1,000 years. Yet within this bleak landscape, something remarkable was stirring. The same chaos that obliterated Ugarit also cleared the ground for new beginnings. Take the Phoenicians' descendants of Ugarit's maritime culture, who emerged from this collapse with streamlined ship designs and a refined alphabet, becoming the Mediterranean's premier traders. Or the Israelites forging a new identity in the highlands of Canaan, their stories preserving fragments of Ugaritic myths in what would become the Hebrew Bible. Even Greece, though battered by the collapse, saw the seeds of its future classical glory sown in this period. The paradox is striking. The darkness after Ugarit's fall wasn't just emptiness, it was fertile ground where the scattered pieces of the old world slowly rearranged into something new. This cycle prosperity, collapse, rebirth isn't unique to Ugarit. The Roman Empire's fall plunged Europe into centuries of fragmentation before the Renaissance. The Black Death decimated medieval populations but also broke feudal systems, paving the way for modern labor markets. Even the extinction of the dinosaurs made room for mammals to thrive. History seems to whisper that collapse isn't always an ending sometimes. It's a brutal kind of pruning, clearing away the old to make space for the new. But here's the unsettling question lurking beneath these patterns. Are we any different? Modern civilization clings to the belief that we've outgrown this cycle, that with our satellites, vaccines, and global supply chains, we're immune to the forces that toppled Ugarit. Yet the cracks are visible: climate stress testing agriculture, geopolitical tensions fraying alliances, digital systems vulnerable to cascading failures. The difference this time isn't that we're exempt from the cycle, it's that we're the first civilization with the tools to recognize it before it's too late. Ugarit survivors didn't have climate models or economic forecasts. They could only react as the world crumbled around them. We at least have the chance to rewrite the next chapter before the collapse comes. Perhaps the real lesson of Ugarit's aftermath isn't just about fragility, it's about humility. Every golden age carries the seeds of its own decline, but every dark age holds the promise of reinvention. The challenge isn't avoiding collapse entirely. That may be impossible, but ensuring that what rises from the ashes is wiser, fairer, and more resilient than what came before. After all, the Phoenician traders who sailed past Ugarit's ruins didn't replicate its mistakes. They built something leaner, more adaptable, and ultimately more enduring. If history is any guide, our task isn't to prevent the end of the world as we know it, but to decide what kind of world comes next. When the walls of Ugarit crumbled, its people faced an impossible choice: perish with their city or become strangers in a strange land. Archaeologists trace their footsteps through scattered clues: pottery styles suddenly appearing in Cyprus, alphabetic inscriptions surfacing in distant ports, myths from Ugarit's temples resurfacing in new forms centuries later. These weren't just refugees fleeing destruction, they were cultural alchemists, transforming loss into legacy. One particularly poignant find is a set of household gods discovered in a Philistine city, identical to those worshipped in Ugarit's homes. Carried across the sea by desperate hands, these small figurines became anchors of identity in an uprooted world. What's striking is how these ancient patterns mirror modern diasporas. Like Syrian artisans preserving Aleppo's craft traditions in Istanbul workshops, or Ukrainian musicians playing ancestral folk songs in Warsaw basements, the human impulse to carry culture forward defies even the worst catastrophes. Ugarit's survivors didn't just replicate their old lives, they adapted them, blending traditions with new influences to create something resilient. In Cyprus, archaeologists found Ugaritic-style temples built with local materials, their rituals subtly altered to incorporate island deities. This wasn't cultural surrender, it was reinvention, proving that preservation often requires transformation. Yet the psychological toll echoes across millennia. A tablet from Imar, another fallen city, laments, "We eat the bread of exile and our tongues cling to the roofs of our mouths." That raw grief feels painfully familiar to anyone who's heard a displaced grandmother describe recipes she can no longer cook or watched a refugee child struggle to recall forgotten words. The Bronze Age collapse didn't just scatter people, it severed threads of memory, leaving later generations to piece together half-remembered stories. But here's where Ugarit's legacy offers unexpected hope. That very fragmentation forced innovation. when Phoenician traders, likely descendants of Ugarit's maritime culture, streamlined the alphabet for commerce, they turned a survival tool into a world-changing technology. Similarly, today's diaspora communities often become hubs of creativity, blending traditions to spark new art forms, cuisines, and ideas. The Kurdish poet exiled writing in Swedish, the Congolese musician fusing rumba with electronic beats. These are Ugarit's spiritual heirs, proving that cultural survival isn't about freezing the past in amber, but letting it evolve in dialogue with the present. Perhaps the most profound lesson lies in what didn't disappear. Despite earthquakes, invasions, and centuries of oblivion, Ugarit's greatest inventions, its alphabet, its legal codes, its stories of gods and heroes, never truly vanished. They seeped into the bedrock of civilization, resurfacing in ways their creators could never have imagined. That's the paradox of collapse. It doesn't erase, it redistributes. When we listen closely, the whispers of lost cities like Ugarit remind us that resilience isn't about withstanding the storm unchanged. It's about learning to bend, to blend, and ultimately to begin again. 3,000 years may separate us from Ugarit's crumbling walls, but the echoes of its collapse reverberate through today's headlines with eerie precision. Consider the climate crisis. Ugarit's agricultural heartland withered under prolonged droughts, just as modern farmers from Texas to Punjab watch their fields bake under record heat. Ancient pollen samples tell us Ugarit's harvests failed season after season, forcing reliance on grain imports that never arrived when trading partners faced their own shortages. Now fast forward to our interconnected world, where a war in Ukraine sends bread prices soaring in Africa, or a drought in California disrupts global almond supplies. The mechanisms have grown more complex, but the vulnerability remains the same. Civilizations thrive on stability, and when the environment shifts, everything else teeters. Geopolitically, the parallels are just as stark. Ugarit's fate was sealed not by a single enemy, but by a cascade of failures. The Hittite Empire crumbling, Egypt withdrawing its protection, and mysterious raiders exploiting the chaos. Today, we see similar domino effects. A financial crisis in one country triggering global recessions, or a pandemic exposing how dependent nations are on far-flung supply chains. Ugarit's diplomats once navigated a multipolar world of clashing superpowers, much like our own era of shifting alliances between the United States, China, and emerging blocs. Their mistake wasn't in building connections, it was assuming those connections would always hold. Yet the most haunting similarity lies in how both societies ignored early warnings. Ugarit's scribes recorded years of erratic rainfall and pirate attacks before the final collapse, just as modern scientists have spent decades charting rising CO2 levels and cybersecurity experts warn of infrastructure vulnerabilities. The real tragedy isn't that civilizations fall, it's that they often see the storm coming but fail to change course. But here's where history offers a glimmer of hope. Ugarit's survivors didn't just vanish, they carried fragments of their culture into new beginnings. Today, we have an advantage they lacked, the ability to learn from their hindsight. Renewable energy could buffer us from resource wars, decentralized networks might prevent systemic collapses, and digital archives ensure knowledge outlasts any single disaster. The lesson isn't that collapse is inevitable, it's that resilience is a choice. And unlike Ugarit, we still have time to choose wisely. Ugarit's merchants would feel eerily at home in today's globalized world. Their ships carried copper from Cyprus to Egypt, grain from Anatolia to Mesopotamia, and purple dye from the Levant to Aegean palaces. A Bronze Age version of the container ships crisscrossing modern oceans. Just as a delayed shipment in Shanghai can idle factories in Detroit, Ugarit's economy hinged on goods moving smoothly across unpredictable distances. A single pirate raid or storm could send shockwaves through the system, driving up prices and sparking shortages. Clay tablets reveal frantic correspondence between traders. Why has the tin not arrived? Our smiths sit idle, replace tin with semiconductors and smiths with automakers, and you've got a headline from last year's supply chain crisis. What's fascinating isn't just the similarity of these networks, but how both eras developed stopgap measures. Ugarit's merchants diversified routes, sending half their copper cargoes through overland caravans as insurance against pirate threats, a strategy mirrored by modern companies stockpiling inventory or nearshoring production. Their warehouses brimmed with emergency grain reserves, much like today's strategic petroleum reserves. Yet both systems share a fatal blind spot: overconfidence in stability. Ugarit's traders never imagined the Hittite Empire would collapse, severing their northern trade arteries. Similarly, few predicted a grounded container ship would paralyze global commerce for weeks. The lesson: redundancy only works if you prepare for the unimaginable. Modern technology offers tools Ugarit's merchants could only dream of: blockchain tracking for transparency, AI predicting disruptions, decentralized manufacturing, but the core challenge remains unchanged. When a drought crippled Ugarit's Hittite allies, their plea for grain shipments went unanswered because no system existed to reroute surpluses from Egypt or Babylon. Today, despite satellite crop monitoring and real-time logistics, famine still strikes when political borders block food flows. The difference now is that we can see these crises coming. Climate models give us Ugarit's drought warnings decades in advance, not seasons. The question isn't whether we'll face disruptions, but whether we'll use our foresight to build networks that bend instead of break. Perhaps the most poignant parallel lies in human resilience. Amid Ugarit's collapse, archaeologists found tablets recording small-scale barters, local farmers swapping olives for pottery when long-distance trade failed. In our own pandemic shortages, communities revived seed swaps and neighborhood tool libraries. These aren't steps backward, they're reminders that the strongest systems balance global scale with local adaptability. Ugarit's tragedy wasn't relying on trade, it was forgetting how to survive without it. As we engineer ever more complex supply chains, their ruins whisper a warning. True security means planning for the day the ships stop coming. After Ugarit's collapse, something chilling happened. Knowledge that had taken centuries to accumulate simply vanished. The city's elegant alphabet, its intricate legal codes, even its advanced metallurgy techniques faded into obscurity, preserved only by scattered survivors or buried under layers of rubble. For generations, literacy in the region dwindled to a trickle, and the art of writing became the domain of a privileged few once more. This wasn't just a pause in progress, it was a full-scale regression, a reminder that technological advancement isn't a one-way street. Think about it, those clay tablets in Ugarit's archives held everything from medical remedies to architectural schematics. Yet when the city fell, that wisdom evaporated like water in the desert sun. Now consider our own world, where we've outsourced memory to fragile systems. Your photos live in the cloud, your bank records exist as electrons on a server, and entire libraries could vanish with a well-placed cyber attack or solar flare. Unlike Ugarit's clay tablets, which survived fires, earthquakes, and millennia of neglect, our digital archives are shockingly ephemeral. A study from the University of California estimates that the average lifespan of a web page is just 100 days before it's altered or deleted. Even physical backups like CDs degrade within decades. We've built a civilization on the assumption that progress is permanent, but Ugarit's ruins whisper otherwise. Parallels go deeper than data storage. Ugarit's artisans mastered bronze alloys so durable that weapons from its ruins still gleam after 3,000 years. Yet after the collapse, simpler iron tools replaced them, not because iron was better, but because the knowledge of bronze smithing had fragmented. Today, we face our own version of this crisis. Ever tried fixing a modern car without specialized software, or asked a young engineer to draft blueprints by hand? As skills central to previous generations fade, we grow more dependent on opaque systems few truly understand. When a single chip shortage can halt global auto production, it's clear how vulnerable specialization makes us. But here's where Ugarit's story offers a flicker of hope. Though its alphabet disappeared for a time, it didn't vanish completely. Phoenician traders, heirs to Ugarit's legacy, eventually resurrected and simplified it, creating a script so adaptable it birthed nearly every modern writing system. Their breakthrough wasn't just preserving knowledge, it was making it accessible, stripping away complexity so literacy could thrive even in hard times. That's the lesson for our digital age. Resilience isn't about rejecting technology, but democratizing it. Projects like the GitHub Arctic Vault, which stores open-source code in a decommissioned mine deep beneath permafrost, or libraries printing Wikipedia volumes for posterity, follow this same instinct, building backups that don't require advanced tech to decode. The haunting question Ugarit leaves us with isn't whether our systems could fail, but whether we've safeguarded the tools to rebuild. When excavators unearthed the city's kilns, they found something remarkable. Potters had left behind clay recipe tablets, instructions so precise that modern artisans could replicate their techniques. That's the kind of foresight we're only beginning to emulate, encoding knowledge in forms that outlast empires. Because progress isn't just about climbing higher, it's about leaving handholds for those who might need to climb back up. The clay tablets from Ugarit's final days reveal a haunting pattern: leaders who saw the storm coming but couldn't steer their city to safety. One particularly desperate letter from the king to a neighboring ally captures the paralysis. "Our cities burn, our fields lie barren, and still you send no troops." What's striking isn't just the plea for help, but what came before it: years of ignored warnings. Earlier dispatches show advisors urging grain stockpiles as droughts worsened, merchants begging for naval escorts amid rising piracy. Yet the palace responded with half measures and wishful thinking. This wasn't ignorance, it was the slow unraveling of leadership under pressure, a cautionary tale etched in cuneiform. Modern crises expose similar fault lines. When COVID-19 first emerged, some nations acted swiftly with testing and lockdowns, while others downplayed the threat until hospitals overflowed. The difference between South Korea's containment and Italy's early chaos mirrors Ugarit's divide: leaders who heeded data versus those trapped in denial. But effective crisis response goes beyond just acknowledging problems. Ugarit's rulers had fragments of good ideas. They negotiated with invaders, rationed food, even relocated some citizens, yet these efforts failed because they were reactive, disjointed, and fatally slow. Compare that to New Zealand's pandemic playbook: clear communication, unified scientific guidance, and rapid border controls that treated the crisis as a systemic threat rather than a series of isolated fires to put out. The deeper lesson lies in what psychologists call cognitive rigidity, the inability to abandon old frameworks when reality shifts. Ugarit's elite kept acting as if they still lived in an age of stable alliances and predictable harvests, even as their world burned. We see echoes today in leaders clinging to outdated economic models as inequality balloons, or dismissing climate thresholds as distant threats. True crisis leadership isn't just about making decisions, it's about rethinking the very tools used to make them. When Singapore's government pivoted from SARS protocols to COVID-specific strategies within weeks, They demonstrated what Ugarit's palace never could: the agility to rewrite the rules mid-game. Yet history offers glimpses of alternatives. Amid Ugarit's collapse, one governor's archive stands out: tablets showing meticulous preparations for siege, with decentralized food stores and trained neighborhood militias. Though his city still fell, these measures bought time for civilians to flee westward, where their descendants helped seed Phoenician culture. Centuries later, Rome's Emperor Marcus Aurelius would face plague and invasion by empowering local leaders rather than micromanaging, a lesson some pandemic-era mayors rediscovered when federal systems faltered. The thread connecting these moments is distributive leadership, recognizing that survival in chaos demands more than one center of wisdom. What makes this ancient failure so urgent is its ordinariness. Ugarit's rulers weren't cartoonish villains. They were overwhelmed officials balancing short-term stability against existential risks, much like today's politicians weighing economy against climate action. Their fatal flaw wasn't malice, but the inability to act decisively on long-term threats while day-to-day crises screamed for attention. Sound familiar? As we face our own compounding disasters, from cyberattacks to ecosystem collapse, Ugarit's ruins whisper a blunt warning. Civilizations aren't destroyed by their crises, but by their refusal to meet them with clear eyes and flexible minds. The difference between resilience and ruin may come down to leaders brave enough to say, "This time we do things differently." Buried beneath layers of volcanic ash and centuries of neglect, Ugarit's clay tablets survived fires, invasions, and the slow erosion of time, not by accident but by design. These weren't just casual notes scribbled on whatever was handy. They were meticulously fired like pottery, baked into permanence, their wedge-shaped marks enduring long after the hands that pressed them into wet clay had turned to dust. Think about that for a moment: a merchant's contract for 500 jars of olive oil, a priest's hymn to the storm god, even a teenager's practice alphabet, all preserved not in some grand tomb, but in the humble act of turning mud into stone. That's the power of intentional documentation, a lesson that feels almost revolutionary in our age of disappearing tweets and corrupted hard drives. Now consider the fragility of our own records. Digital storage seems miraculous: entire libraries crammed onto a device smaller than your palm, but it's built on foundations far shakier than Ugarit's clay. A study from the University of Illinois found that the average lifespan of a hard drive is just 3 to 5 years, while magnetic tapes degrade within a decade. Even cloud storage, that seemingly infinite digital fortress, relies on data centers vulnerable to power failures, cyber attacks, or simple corporate collapse. When MySpace accidentally deleted 12 years of music uploads in 2019, it wasn't malice, just a faulty server migration. Compare that to Ugarit's tablets, which waited patiently in the dirt for 30 centuries, ready to whisper their stories the moment archaeologists brushed them clean. Yet Ugarit's scribes understood something we often forget. Preservation isn't just about the medium, but the method. Their tablets weren't scattered randomly. They were organized in labeled shelves with envelopes of clay protecting sensitive documents. Important texts existed in multiple copies, stored in separate buildings so a single disaster couldn't erase them. This was redundancy baked into bureaucracy, a system designed to outlast its creators. Today, initiatives like the Internet Archive's Wayback Machine or Norway's Arctic World Archive, which stores global data on photosensitive film deep inside a mountain, echo this ancient wisdom, recognizing that survival demands both durability and distribution. But here's where Ugarit's legacy gets even more profound. Those tablets didn't just preserve facts, they captured the rhythm of daily life. A shopping list scribbled beside a royal decree reminds us that history isn't made solely by kings and battles, but by ordinary people buying bread and mending sandals. Similarly, modern projects like the Voices of the Past initiative record not just textbooks, but oral histories, grandparents' recipes, childhood games, the slang of subway musicians, because future civilizations will need more than our Wikipedia pages to understand who we really were. The real challenge isn't just technical, it's philosophical. Ugarit's rulers documented everything because they believed their words might one day matter to strangers they'd never meet. Do we share that faith when we tweet into the void or let photos languish unbacked up on old phones? We're making a quiet bet that nothing we do is worth remembering. Yet every time archaeologists piece together a broken tablet to reveal a forgotten hymn or a long-lost trade route, they prove otherwise. Survival isn't guaranteed, not to cities, not to civilizations, certainly not to hard drives. But as long as someone, somewhere, still cares to press words into something more lasting than the moment, the conversation never truly ends. The Ugaritic language wasn't just a tool for communication, it was the heartbeat of a civilization, a living tapestry woven with myths, laws, and the daily chatter of marketplaces. Unlike the cumbersome cuneiform of Mesopotamia or the hieroglyphs of Egypt, Ugaritic's sleek 30-letter alphabet captured the rhythm of spoken speech with startling efficiency. Scribes could record everything from epic poetry to laundry, lists in strokes so simple that literacy spread beyond palace walls. But when the city fell, that vibrant tongue didn't just fade, it shattered, leaving behind fragments that linguists are still piecing together today. The loss wasn't merely about words, it was about worldview. Consider how Ugaritic's multiple words for sea reflected its maritime soul. One term for calm waters ideal for trade, another for stormy depths feared by sailors. These nuances didn't just describe the world, they encoded how Ugarit's people experienced it. Now fast forward to our era, where a language vanishes every 2 weeks, taking with it entire ways of thinking. The Yagan tongue of Tierra del Fuego, for instance, had a word mamahlapanatape, meaning the silent, knowing look between two people who want the same thing but won't initiate. Its last native speaker died in 2022, and with her went a concept English needs 6 words to express. This isn't just about vocabulary, it's about losing cognitive diversity. Languages structure reality differently, from the Gugu Yimith speakers of Australia who navigate using cardinal directions instead of left and right, to the Tuvan nomads whose verbs encode precise knowledge of mountain passes. Each extinction erases a unique lens on existence. The parallels between Ugarit's linguistic legacy and today's endangered tongues reveal a sobering truth. Languages don't disappear in isolation. They're casualties of broader collapses: colonialism, globalization, climate displacement. Ugaritic faded when its scribes were killed or enslaved, its schools abandoned, its cultural pride crushed under invaders' boots. Similarly, modern languages vanish when children are shamed out of speaking their parents' mother tongue, or when economic pressures prioritize dominant languages like English or Mandarin. Yet there are glimmers of hope. The revival of Hebrew, once a liturgical language, into Israel's vibrant national tongue proves resurrection is possible. Wales has doubled its Welsh speakers since the 1980s through immersive schools, while New Zealand's Maori TV broadcasts nurture Te Reo Maori among youth. Protecting linguistic heritage demands more than dictionaries. It requires ecosystems. In Ugarit's heyday, language thrived because it lived in songs sung at festivals, contracts stamped with cylinder seals, and prayers whispered at household shrine. Modern efforts like the Living Tongues Institute follow this blueprint, pairing linguists with native speakers to create children's books, apps, and oral history projects that make endangered languages functional and cool. Technology plays an unexpected role. AI tools now analyze recordings of last speakers to reconstruct pronunciation, while blockchain platforms help indigenous groups control access to sacred vocabularies. Perhaps the deepest lesson from Ugarit lies in what happens when we listen to the whispers of lost languages. Deciphering Ugaritic tablets revealed that the biblical phrase, full moon, originally meant the night of the watchman in Canaanite, a glimpse into ancient timekeeping. Similarly, when we preserve a vanishing tongue today, we're not just saving words, we're safeguarding humanity's collective memory. The next time you hear an elder speak a fading language, remember, their voice carries echoes of Ugarit scribes, proof that every language is a monument to human ingenuity, as worthy of protection as any temple or treasure. Ugarit's towering palaces and bustling markets weren't just symbols of prosperity, they were magnets for envy and attack. The city's wealth, concentrated in a few square miles of gleaming temples and storerooms bursting with goods, made it irresistible to raiders and rival kingdoms. When crisis came, that very density became a liability. Narrow streets designed for commerce turned into death traps during invasions, while centralized granaries meant a single siege could starve thousands. Fast forward 3 millennia, and our modern megacities shimmering with skyscrapers and threaded with subways face eerily similar vulnerabilities. The same density that fuels innovation and culture also creates choke points where disaster can ripple outward at terrifying speed. Take Tokyo, a metropolis of 37 million people. Its efficiency is legendary, with trains moving millions daily like clockwork. But this precision relies on fragile systems, a power grid stretched thin, underground networks vulnerable to flooding, and supply chains that assume constant movement. When a massive earthquake struck in 2011, the city's resilience was tested not just by shaking ground, but by the cascading failures that followed. Stranded commuters overwhelmed shelters, pharmacies ran short of medicine, and gas shortages paralyzed emergency vehicles. The parallels to Ugarit are uncanny. Both cities built marvels of urban planning, yet both discovered that complexity can become a trap when systems fail. But density isn't destiny. While Ugarit's centralized design amplified its collapse, other ancient cities adapted differently. Mohenjo-Daro in the Indus Valley, for instance, spread its infrastructure across decentralized grids with neighborhood wells and redundant marketplaces. When floods came, some sectors might flood while others stayed functional, a lesson modern cities like Amsterdam have embraced with floating districts and distributed green spaces. The contrast raises a provocative question. Are today's urban planners repeating Ugarit's mistakes by stacking ever more people into ever taller towers, or are they learning from history? The answer lies in the details. New York's post-9/11 redesign of its financial district included redundant power lines and wider evacuation routes, while Copenhagen's climate-adaptive architecture turns stormwater into public fountains. These aren't just tweaks, they're radical rethinking of urban DNA, acknowledging that resilience means building for disruption. Yet for every Copenhagen, there's a Lagos or Mumbai where breakneck growth outpaces planning, leaving millions in informal settlements vulnerable to floods or disease. The divide mirrors Ugarit's final days, when the wealthy elite retreated behind reinforced walls while the outer city burned. Technology offers tantalizing solutions but also new risks. Smart cities with AI-managed traffic and energy grids promise efficiency, yet a single cyber attack could turn those systems into weapons. Imagine hackers triggering false tsunami alerts in Jakarta or disabling water pumps in Phoenix, urban chaos at the speed of code. Ugarit's kings feared battering rams, mayors today dread ransomware. The scale has changed, but the strategic dilemma remains: how much connectivity is too much? Perhaps the most unsettling parallel is psychological. Ugarit's leaders likely never imagined their city could fall, just as modern urbanites shrug off warnings about pandemics or climate migration. Complacency thrives in places that feel permanent until they aren't. Yet history offers alternative models. After the Great Fire of London in 1666, rebuilders didn't just replicate the old wooden maze, they mandated brick construction and wider streets, trading medieval charm for survival. That's the choice facing every glittering metropolis today: cling to the illusions of invincibility, or embrace the humility that comes from studying ruins like Ugarit. Because the greatest threat isn't the disasters we can foresee, it's the ones we've forgotten to fear. Ugarit's hills weren't always barren. Core samples from the soil tell a story of lush forests that once carpeted the land, their roots holding fertile earth in place until relentless logging and overgrazing turned green slopes to dust. Archaeologists find tablets lamenting dwindling timber shipments and failed harvests, early warnings of an ecological debt coming due. The city's fate wasn't sealed by invaders alone, but by a slower, quieter enemy: the gradual exhaustion of the land that fed it. Today, we face our own version of this reckoning. Satellite images reveal the Amazon shrinking by football fields every minute, while the Fertile Crescent, birthplace of agriculture, now battles desertification so severe that ancient Sumerian canals emerge from drying riverbeds like skeletal fingers. The mechanisms differ: chainsaws instead of bronze axes, industrial monocrops replacing subsistence farming, but the pattern remains eerily consistent. Civilizations rise by exploiting nature's bounty, then falter when that generosity runs dry. Yet Ugarit's story holds clues to breaking this cycle. Recent digs uncovered terraces carved into hillsides beyond the city, evidence of farmers fighting erosion with techniques still used in Peru's Andes today. One tablet even details a royal decree protecting certain forests as the breath of the gods, suggesting glimmers of conservation ethics. These weren't just survival tactics, they were acknowledgments that prosperity couldn't be sustained by taking without giving back. Modern solutions echo this wisdom with high-tech twists. Israeli drip irrigation, born from necessity in another drought-prone region, now revives arid land worldwide, while Australian ranchers mimic Aboriginal fire practices to regenerate soil. Even ancient terrace farming finds new life in vertical agriculture, where skyscraper greenhouses yield 30 times more per acre than traditional fields. What unites these innovations isn't just technology, but philosophy of viewing nature as a partner rather than a pantry. The real lesson from Ugarit's environmental collapse isn't despair, it's agency. When Maya cities faced similar crises around 900 CE, some doubled down on deforestation until collapse, while others, like Tikal, shifted to wetland farming and survived centuries longer. That fork in the road confronts us now. As California's sequoias bake and European rivers run dry, we're reminded that resilience isn't about avoiding change, but adapting with intention. Ugarit's ruins whisper that the difference between decline and endurance often comes down to a simple choice: exploit until nothing remains, or innovate while there's still time. Walking through the Louvre or the British Museum today, you might pause before a clay tablet etched with Ugaritic script, ordinary receipts for barley shipments, love poems to forgotten gods, even a student's clumsy first attempts at writing. These fragments seem humble, yet they're time machines, offering whispers from a civilization that vanished 3,000 years ago. But here's the uncomfortable truth: many of these artifacts weren't discovered by local scholars carefully unearthing their own heritage. They were hauled away by European archaeologists in the 19th and 20th centuries, shipped to foreign capitals as trophies of colonial-era exploration. The very tablets that let us hear Ugarit's voice now sit thousands of miles from where they were born, sparking fierce debates about who truly owns the past. The argument for keeping artifacts in global museums often centers on preservation and access. Institutions like the Louvre argue their climate-controlled vitrines protect fragile objects from looting, war, or environmental decay, risks very real for sites like Ugarit, which lies in modern-day Syria, a nation ravaged by conflict. There's also the case for shared heritage. A child in Paris or Tokyo might encounter Ugarit's alphabet and feel connected to humanity's collective story in ways they never could if these treasures stayed tucked away in regional museums with fewer resources. But this logic rings hollow to many in the Middle East, where generations have grown up seeing their ancestors' achievements labeled as Mesopotamian or Near Eastern artifacts, divorced from the living cultures that still inhabit these lands. Restitution efforts are gaining momentum, but the path is fraught. When Germany returned a trove of Babylonian tablets to Iraq in 2021, it was a victory until officials realized some had been looted after the U.S. invasion and lacked proper excavation records. Without context, their historical value crumbles. Ugarit's case is even trickier. Its ruins straddle the coast of Syria, where civil war has left heritage sites vulnerable. Returning artifacts now could expose them to danger, yet withholding them indefinitely feels like a paternalistic denial of agency. The solution might lie in hybrid models, like the partnership between the University of Chicago and Iraq, where digitized tablets allow global study while originals gradually return home, proof that stewardship doesn't have to mean possession. Beyond legal ownership, there's a deeper question. What does it mean to preserve a culture? Ugarit's artifacts in glass cases are frozen in time, but its true legacy lies in the descendants of its people, the Syrian fishermen who still sail the same Mediterranean waters, the Lebanese poets who weave ancient myths into modern verse. Some of the most vital preservation happens not in museums, but in initiatives like the Syrian Heritage Archive Project, where locals digitize endangered sites, or in Aleppo's rebuilt souks, where artisans relearn Crusader-era stonework. These efforts acknowledge that cultural survival isn't just about saving objects. It's about keeping skills, stories, and identities alive in the hands of those who inherit them. Perhaps the most poignant lesson comes from Ugarit itself. Among its ruins, archaeologists found a tablet inscribed with a hymn to the moon god, not in a temple, but in a humble house where someone had copied it painstakingly by hand. That intimate act, not the grand palace archives, captures how cultures truly endure, through everyday people passing down what matters to them. When we debate restitution, we're not just arguing over objects. We're asking who gets to decide what fragments of the past are worth remembering, and what it costs when those decisions are made oceans away from the soil where history began. The Sea Peoples didn't just attack cities, they erased identities. When they swept through the Mediterranean around 1200 BCE, they left behind no monuments, no king lists, not even a clear name for themselves. The only traces we have are the panicked accounts of their victims, like the Ugaritic scribe who scrawled, "The enemy ships came and my cities were burned." Modern historians pore over these fragments like detectives at a cold crime scene, piecing together clues from Egyptian reliefs showing horned helmets, Hittite prayers begging for deliverance, and Cypriot ports littered with shattered pottery. Yet after centuries of research, we still don't know where they came from, what language they spoke, or even why they launched their devastating campaigns. This isn't just a gap in the historical record, it's a void where an entire people should be. What makes their ambiguity so unsettling is how familiar it feels today. Cyber warfare follows eerily similar patterns, attacks that materialize from nowhere, attributed to shadowy groups with names like Fancy Bear or Lazarus, their motives as opaque as their origins. A hospital's servers go dark, a pipeline grinds to a halt, and by the time analysts trace the digital fingerprints, the perpetrators have vanished into layers of proxy servers and cutouts. The Sea Peoples didn't wear uniforms or fly flags. Modern hackers exploit the same advantage, operating in the blur between state actors and freelance mercenaries. Both thrive on the same terrifying truth. It's hard to defend against an enemy you can't see, name, or understand, yet the parallels run deeper than tactics. Just as Ugarit's leaders assumed their alliances would protect them, modern governments often rely on brittle systems of deterrence, mutual defense pacts, firewalls, sanctions, that crumble when faced with asymmetrical threats. A Bronze Age king could raise walls against invading armies, but how do you fortify a coastline against raiders who strike and vanish? Today's equivalents are ransomware gangs who exploit the weakest link in a supply chain, or AI-generated disinformation that erodes trust without a single soldier crossing a border. The lesson isn't that we're doomed to repeat history, but that we're still grappling with the same fundamental vulnerability. Civilizations build order, and chaos always finds a way around it. Archaeology offers a glimmer of hope. Recent isotopic analysis of Sea Peoples' weapons suggests many weren't born marauders, but refugees displaced by earlier collapses, a reminder that today's enemies may be tomorrow's allies. Similarly, cybersecurity experts now prioritize resilience over impenetrability, designing systems that can isolate damage and reboot quickly, much like the Phoenicians who emerged from the Bronze Age collapse by building faster, nimbler ships. The greatest defense against ambiguity isn't more walls but adaptability, the ability to pivot when the rules change. Perhaps the real mystery isn't who the Sea Peoples were, but why we're so unsettled by their ghostly presence. They force us to confront the limits of our knowledge, the illusion of control. In an age where a single algorithm can destabilize democracies or a rogue lab leak can upend global health, their story resonates because it's ours too. We may never find a tablet that finally reveals their true name, but their legacy endures in every unanswerable question about the shadows lurking at the edges of our connected world. Ugarit's ruins have a way of haunting the modern imagination, popping up in places you might not expect. From documentary reenactments showing scribes etching clay tablets by flickering lamplight to video games where players navigate its crumbling streets, this 3,000-year-old city has become an unlikely cultural touchstone. But why does a civilization that vanished so completely still grip us so tightly? There's something irresistible about ancient mysteries, the gaps in history that invite us to fill them with our own questions, fears, and hopes. When a game like Assassin's Creed recreates Ugarit's bustling harbor, or a Netflix special dramatizes its final days, we're not just learning about the past, we're holding up a mirror to our own fragile world. Take the way Ugarit's collapse parallels modern anxieties. A strategy game like Civilization lets players guide a Bronze Age empire through droughts and invasions, forcing them to confront the same dilemmas Ugarit's leaders faced. Do you stockpile grain or invest in armies? Fortify borders or strengthen alliances? These aren't just historical what-ifs, they're rehearsals for real-world crises. When a player's virtual city collapses from poor planning, it's hard not to think of supply chain disruptions or climate migrations today. Ugarit becomes more than a setting. It's a cautionary tale dressed up as entertainment. But our fascination isn't just about doom and gloom. Ugarit's alphabet, the ancestor of our own letters, stars in educational apps designed to teach kids the evolution of writing. Its myths inspire fantasy novels where gods like Baal and An get resurrected as characters battling cosmic chaos. Even heavy metal bands have riffed on Ugaritic poetry, setting hymns to the storm god to pounding drums and distortion. What's striking is how fluidly these ancient ideas adapt to new mediums, proving that cultural DNA can outlast empires. Perhaps the deepest allure lies in the unanswered questions. A podcast speculating about the Sea Peoples taps into our love of mystery, while a museum exhibit showcasing Ugarit's trade goods reminds us how much we still don't know. In an age of information overload, there's something thrilling about confronting gaps in the record, spaces where imagination can roam. When a documentary narrator wonders whether Ugarit's last king regretted ignoring early warnings, we're really asking ourselves, are we paying attention to the signs around us? The irony is delicious. A city that meticulously recorded its receipts and treaties now thrives in the realm of myth and speculation. Ugarit scribes could never have imagined their administrative lists would one day fuel conspiracy theories or inspire indie game developers. Yet here we are, retelling their story in tweets, VR experiences, and TikTok deep dives. Maybe that's the ultimate lesson. Civilizations don't truly end when their walls fall. They end when the last voice stops telling their tale, and right now, Ugarit's echoes are louder than ever. The same Mediterranean winds that once filled Ugarit's sails now carry something new, drones buzzing over its ruins, their high-resolution cameras capturing details invisible to the naked eye. This isn't your grandfather's archaeology. Modern teams armed with LiDAR scanners can peer through layers of soil without lifting a shovel, revealing entire neighborhoods buried for millennia. Just last year, satellite thermal imaging detected anomalies near Ugarit's harbor, possible remains of shipyards or warehouses that could rewrite our understanding of Bronze Age trade. What took decades of painstaking excavation in the 20th century might now be mapped in weeks, all thanks to technologies that would seem like magic to the city's ancient scribes. Artificial intelligence is cracking codes even faster than Ugarit's own cryptographers. Machine learning algorithms trained on thousands of clay tablets can now predict missing words in damaged texts with startling accuracy, like linguistic autocomplete for the ancient world. One recently reconstructed a broken hymn to the goddess Asherah, filling gaps that had stumped scholars for generations. Other programs analyze pottery shards in seconds, matching chemical signatures to pinpoint their origins, whether Cyprus copper, rich clay, or Egypt's distinctive Nile silt. These tools don't replace human expertise, they amplify it, letting researchers ask bigger questions. Instead of spending years cataloging shards, they can focus on patterns. How did trade routes shift before collapse? Which neighborhoods had access to luxury imports? The answers hide in data too vast for any single mind to process. Yet the most profound revelations may come from beneath the ground. Ground-penetrating radar has uncovered what appears to be a sprawling suburb beyond Ugarit's walls, a discovery challenging assumptions that the city was densely centralized. Meanwhile, environmental DNA analysis of ancient soil samples detects traces of plants and animals, reconstructing diets and ecosystems with forensic precision. We now know Ugarit's elites dined on rare spices from India centuries earlier than previously thought, evidence of trade networks stretching farther than imagined. Even climate history is being rewritten through techniques like isotopic analysis of oyster shells from Ugarit's middens, proving the city's collapse coincided with a perfect storm of droughts and cooling. What makes these advances revolutionary isn't just their precision, it's their democratization. citizen scientists can now explore 3D scans of Ugarit tablets online, spotting patterns professionals might miss. Syrian scholars barred from their homeland by conflict collaborate virtually with international teams, studying digitized artifacts in astonishing detail. This global conversation mirrors Ugarit's own role as a crossroads, proving that preserving the past isn't about hoarding treasures in museums, but making knowledge accessible across borders and generations. The real promise lies in connecting dots we didn't know existed. AI cross-referencing Ugarit's trade records with Egyptian tax lists recently revealed a hidden economic crisis decades before the Sea People's raids, a warning our own leaders would do well to heed. As quantum computing matures, it may decipher the handful of Ugaritic texts still resisting translation, potentially unlocking lost wisdom about governance, medicine, or even early philosophy. Every technological leap peels back another layer, reminding us that history isn't a static record, it's an ongoing conversation between past and present. Perhaps the most humbling lesson comes from Ugarit's own technological legacy. That humble alphabet, born from necessity in a melting pot city, became the foundation for nearly every writing system today. As we develop tools to study the past, we're continuing a tradition as old as civilization itself, using innovation to bridge the gap between what was, what is, and what might yet be. The future of archaeology isn't just about uncovering lost cities. It's about realizing how much we still have to learn from them. The fall of Ugarit isn't just a relic of the past, it's a mirror reflecting our own precarious moment in history. Think about how quickly the city's bustling markets and diplomatic networks unraveled when drought, invasion, and systemic failures converged. Now look around. Our global supply chains stretch thinner than Ugarit's trade routes ever did. Our climate grows more erratic by the year, and our digital systems face threats the city's scribes couldn't have fathomed. Yet there's a crucial difference. Ugarit's leaders had no satellites to predict storms, no models to simulate economic collapses, no way to share warnings faster than a ship could sail. We have all those tools, and that's what makes this ancient story not just sobering but oddly hopeful. Resilience isn't about avoiding shocks, it's about learning to dance with them. Ugarit's survivors didn't rebuild their grand palaces, but they carried forward the ideas that mattered: the alphabet, the myths, the hard-won knowledge of how fragile prosperity can be. Today, we see glimmers of that same adaptability. Farmers from Kenya to Kansas are reviving ancient drought-resistant crops. Cities are decentralizing power grids after watching single points of failure spark disasters, and communities are rediscovering local trade networks as global systems strain. These aren't steps backward, they're acts of wisdom, acknowledging that survival sometimes means scaling down to scale up. The real warning from Ugarit isn't that civilizations fall. It's that they often crumble while still believing they're invincible. Those clay tablets pleading for grain shipments reveal a heartbreaking truth. By the time leaders grasped the scale of their crisis, the window for action had already closed. We're in the opposite position, staring at decades of climate projections, cybersecurity reports, and economic forecasts that all point to looming tipping points. The question isn't whether we'll face disruptions, but whether we'll heed history's lesson. Preparation isn't paranoia. It's the only way to ensure that when the storm comes, we're not just another city begging for help that never arrives. So what do we take from Ugarit's ashes? Not despair, but clarity. Their world didn't end because it was weak. It ended because it was rigid, over-centralized, and too slow to adapt. Ours doesn't have to follow that path. Every wind turbine spinning where coal plants once stood, every neighborhood planting rain gardens to buffer floods, Every engineer designing systems with failure in mind, these are the antidotes to Ugarit's fate. The past doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes, and right now we hold the pen. The next stanza doesn't have to be an elegy. It could be a manifesto for resilience written in the choices we make today. Now it's your turn. When you look at Ugarit's story, what parallels strike you most? Are there modern systems or traditions you think could help us avoid their mistakes? Drop your thoughts below. History's greatest lessons come alive when we wrestle with them together. And if you found this journey through time as gripping as we have, hit subscribe. Because understanding how civilizations rise, fall, and reinvent themselves isn't just about the past, it's about crafting a future worth remembering.